Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am joined by Carlos Rodríguez Braun, very prolific author and professor of economics, history of economic thought at the Complutense University of Madrid. And we are going to be discussing mostly his recent book, El Pensamiento de Milei, course that is the ideology of Milei. And thank you so much, Carlos, for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks to you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to obviously discuss a lot of the the details of the book, but I remember I listened to a podcast you did at some point. If I believe correctly, you originally for the elections in Argentina, you were not favoring Milei to win the election. Is that correct?
That is correct. I only knew Millet from his works, his books, particularly through his participations in Twitter or YouTube, all the social networks. He didn't seem to be very trustworthy to my point of view, and being that the alternatives were the populist, the Peronist, or the Kirchnerist, and on the other hand, the center people from Macri and particularly Patricia Bullrich, I thought that the lesser evil will would be the Macri and the Macri people, and I didn't think that Millet in any case had any chances to win.
Hmm. What do you think was the central reason why he was able to win? Essentially, he didn't win outright in the first round, but in the second round, he won after the Bullrich supporters, obviously she pushed her supporters towards him. But in general, why do you think he was able to garner the election?
What is the reason you succeed in every aim that you have in life? No? I mean, he's obviously a very talented man when we speak of connecting with people and if, to being capable of understanding what was the spirit of the Argentine people. They were really tired and fed up. They were fed up with the populist, the Peronist, and and they decided to give a chance to a very strange candidate. I mean, he is very strange. He is really disruptive in his manners, his style, the words he uses, the message, the this idea that I will break everything and I will close the central bank and I'm going to dollarize and you are all a gang of thieves.
Mhm.
He definitely is not a very polite man. And evidently, um, the Argentine people decided to vote for him, which was something that I did not anticipate, nor anyone else. I mean, the polls in the first round, as you've just said, uh, uh, didn't didn't think that Millet would be the winner. He was, I think, because this this idea that Argentinians were simply fed up with the government, with the alternative of the Macri, and decided to give a chance to this extremely strange man.
Mhm. So his most characteristic feature that people latch on to the ideology now is this idea of anarcho-capitalism. And of course, this is not the most popular term in social zeitgeist outside academia, for example. But how would you characterize what he means by this term relative to what someone would just say, oh, he's libertarian or he's liberal in classical sense?
You know, I actually wrote a book to try to answer that question. I think I have it here. This is the book.
Hmm.
And precisely because the answer to your question, Rashid, is difficult. Let us put it very simply. If you have the the classical liberals, let's say the people that believe in the constitutions, that believe in the state and the rule of law, classical liberals, or the minarchists, the people who believe in the state, but it must be a minimum state. Or in the third place, the uh, uh, radical libertarians or anarcho-capitalists. Which would you say, and everyone say, that fits better with Milei? Most people say, "Oh, he's anarcho, he's anarcho." Well, the truth is that he could be classified in any of the three groups. And when he won the election, I started to study more seriously all his works, all his books, in order to publish this book on his ideas. And I found it. I found that it's rather complicated because he switches from one field to another. He did so, for instance, in monetary policy. He was a Chicago boy. He was an admirer of Friedman and of Robert Lucas. And then he switched to the Austrian school. But as you know, uh, there are schools among the Austrian school. There are more libertarians or less libertarian. Let's say it's not the same thing, Hayek and Rothbard. So? Well, Javier Milei seemed to move closer to the Rothbard variety of libertarian ideas. So this is the last step that he took before getting into the Casa Rosada, the presidential house in Argentina. So the answer to your question is we actually don't know, but he has been moving towards a radical libertarian stance.
So this radical libertarian stance, the Rothbardian aspect of it, this feels like it's very centered on economic policy, but doesn't actually work when it comes to Millet's view on social policy. And it's not any more explicit, but we can, get some details. But do you think just that basic characterization would this still fit in social view of Millet's policy?
Very interesting. And also, it shows the complications of Millet's ideas. The first thing I started to study in Millet was his economics. I mean, that is pretty obvious. He's a professional economist, and he has written mainly about economics before he jumped into politics. Before, but then he went into politics and he started to think and to write and to say a lot of things about a lot of subjects. And then we come to things like social policies. This is interesting because, on the one hand, he's very opposite to abortion, extremely opposite. He has said repeatedly, abortion is a crime. Well, then you would say he can be classified then among the conservatives, more religious. He is a religious man, by the way. He was a Christian, and now he has converted into the Jew religion. So you would say that's very easy. He's a conservative. But then you go into marriage, and he not only approves uh, the marriage of people of the same sex, he actually has said, and I sympathize with this position, that politics and the state should have had nothing to do with marriage. That after all, it's a contract between free people. So if you want to be married through your religion, you can do it. If you can just wish to sign a contract, you can do it. So on the one hand, he can be very conservative. On the other hand, he can be very libertarian, as in the example of marriage that I have just mentioned. So he's a complicated man.
So on that point of marriage, I in your book you discuss how he says, yes, the state, he would go to the extreme and say, well, the state shouldn't really be involved in determining who should get married, but that somehow doesn't really ever convince me of anything, because the rationale for why the state isn't involved in marriage is not the religious aspect, of course. It's because it is um the rights attributed to you. The reason why you want to do it in a really real way is because of the state aspect of the contract. Because you could get married in church and not have it solidified by the state anytime you want, but the real burden comes into reason why it's a debate is because of the rights, the taxes, all the other state instruments that you get with marriage.
That is very true. Uh, the involvement of the state in marriage is relatively a recent phenomenon. It's from the 19th century. And of course, marriage is much older than that.
Mhm.
In the Christian tradition, we cherish the first miracle made by our Lord Jesus, and that is in the wedding of Cana, where he turned water into wine. I like that miracle very much. I think it is a very politically incorrect miracle.
Mm.
I think he would be put into jail if we do it today. So, of course, marriage is an institution with thousands of years of age, and the state involvement is very recently. Let me tell you a little bit of story of Argentina. Uh, in many countries, the state and the church fought uh, when the state started to trying to monopolize the institution of marriage. And in Argentina, the fight was so rude that Argentina and the Vatican broke the diplomatic relations. And there were a
Mm.
time where there was no diplomatic relations between a Catholic country like Argentina and the state of the Vatican because precisely of this. So, coming back to Millet, I think that Millet would sympathize with the idea that marriage is an institution between free people with thousands of years of age. You can be religious or not, but he would favor the state not being involved in this institution.
But here is, I think, the rub also. This has come to the general social aspect of the libertarianism, is the there's always, I find that when you're asking this question to people who are libertarian or say they're libertarian, especially these days around the Millet aspect of this term, when it comes to gay marriage, for example, I find it as a very interesting coherence test for thinking about libertarian social philosophy, in the sense that Millet, to my knowledge, has never explicitly said, yes, I am in support of gay marriage. He would usually say, as a disclaimer, in my view, well, I am support of any free people doing this and doing that because marriage should be a contract between people. But in the world we live in, it is not that actual reality. It is a very specific state granted idea. And also, many people around Millet do not favor gay marriage explicitly. And these are people who he had a lot of intellectual salience to, like Agustin Laje, for example, Nicolas Marquez, for example. They're explicitly anti-gay marriage. Even people his government, for example. I'm sure you know that very famous quote with Modena, the former Minister of Foreign Relations, where she likened gay marriage to having lice in your hair. He's like, well, if you want to do it, that's your thing.
Mm.
I don't like it, but that metaphor is so strong in her worldview. So I do actually wonder how salient those kind of things are to Millet.
Hmm. As far as I know, it is true that he has not been explicit. We're always speaking about Millet before, okay? Because
Hmm.
Millet in power, that's a different
Yes.
story. In 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 Millet before, he 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 hasn't been very explicit in the in the sense of saying I am in favor of free gay marriage.
Hmm.
But I wonder if it is strictly necessary to clarify that. As far as you say, I don't want the state to regulate this. Uh, but I think you're right. I mean, he stressed the idea that contract between adults, free people. He didn't mention explicitly, as far as I can remember, the gay marriage. But I think we could say we could take it for granted that this was
Hmm.
so.
So, because I always contrast that reality with, for example, someone like Isabel Diaz Ayuso here in Madrid, where she's very explicitly in favor of those. It's no disclaimer, no additional commentary behind it. Just very explicitly say yes, we're here. Very Spanish. It's a thing. Let's do it. I always find that contrast quite stark.
I think that is true. Now we are moving on. People are they ask me with what figure of Spanish politics could you compare Javier Milei? And of course, the answer you've just said it is Isabel Díaz Ayuso, perhaps more than any other
Hmm.
Spanish politician. Now, you have to keep in mind that specifically in the case of gay marriage, Spain, I believe, is much ahead from
Hmm.
Argentina in terms of legislation.
Hmm.
So I think we have to take that matter into into consideration. I think.
Okay, so something I glossed over a bit just now, which I want to focus on in this. It is one the I find a often critique of Millet is this aspect of his alliances, where he himself is saying, "I am an anarcho-capitalist. I am a big supporter of Rothbard." I believe that many times he said Rothbard is his greatest intellectual influence on his political philosophy, at least currently. But at the same time, he has the strong supporting of like Bolsonaro in Brazil, for example, in Cast in Chile, Abascal in Spain, Meloni in Italy. It would not seem logically consistent for him to be such big supporters of these people.
Of course, it is not logically consistent if we keep our minds in the Millet before politics.
Mm,
Now, once in politics, and once you participate in an election, you win, you have your forces. There are two extreme positions. No? One is I don't want to negotiate anything, and so I have to leave politics and return to my university chair or my professional activities as an economist, or I would negotiate everything. So Millet, as any other politician, by the way, is in the middle of these two extremes. Or you keep your principles and you sacrifice your political life, or you do everything for your political life, sacrificing all your principles. No. As a matter of fact, Millet has done precisely that. I mean, he's in the middle. But
mhm,
being in the middle, he comes to Spain. And then he comes hand in hand with Jose Abascal, the extreme right-wing politician, by the way, a friend of Donald Trump, as we've
Mhm.
seen recently. And so, what to make about that? You know, when Milei came in last summer, there was a meeting in Diario La Razón, and my friend and co-author Juan Ramón Rayo, whom you know,
Mhm.
asked Milei precisely this question. I
Mm.
mean, what are you doing with people like Jose Abascal or Donald Trump, for that matter? But people with Jose Abascal who are obviously not liberals in the European sense. They are not libertarian, not classical liberals. They are nationalists, interventionists, but not liberal people. What are you doing meeting with this kind of politicians? And Millet gave a double and I think a very wise answer. The first, he said, first, he's my friend. When I was alone in the political world, when no one paid any attention to me, Abascal was the only politician in Spain who treated me kindly, invited me to Spain, and respected me. He has always treated me as a friend, and I help friends. That's one answer. I think it's a nice answer. The second answer, is a political answer. And he said to Juan Ramon Rayo, listen, Abascal and me, we do not share many things because I'm a free trader, libertarian, if you wish, classical liberal, whatever. But I believe in liberal ideas, and Abascal does not. But he added, we share the same enemy. And he said, our enemy is the left, the socialists, the communists, the populists. We share those friends, those enemies. And so that was the explanation of Milei. He said to Juan Ramon Rayo, you must not, you should not demand from me an extreme identification with all the ideas of the politicians that surround me. That would be ridiculous, would be absurd in politics. Remember that wonderful book by Max Weber, The Politician and the Scientist, in which he divides these two kind of people. The politician negotiates and make compromises. The scientist never does that because the objective of the science is the truth. You don't negotiate the truth, okay? But in politics, it's not the same world.
So that would be Milei's attempt to rationalize the libertarian populist strategy of Rothbard in called the so-called paleo-libertarian approach to governance. But I find that I share sympathy where I think sure this does make some sense. You do have trade-offs in politics. Nothing's absolutely ideal. However, his again, in my perspective, why I'm asking the question, it doesn't seem merely as a strategic alliance. It genuinely feels like he goes the extra mile to outright support these kind of people. For example, Abascal is not in power. It's a very, very unlikely scenario where he becomes prime minister of Spain. Um, Bolsonaro, for example, is not in power. There are many reasons to question why you even want him to be in power. Even given the reality of Lula, it's somewhat questionable why you even want Bolsonaro in him as a person to be in power. Meloni is in power. That is fair, but is he's not simply doing economic policy with Meloni, who is the prime minister of Italy. It goes to a different extreme in my view. So I do question, why does he go so much effort into being so close to people that goes to mean beyond strategic alliances against left-wing mania?
The short answer, uh, the short answer always is I don't know. but, but trying to elaborate a little bit. Um, perhaps, perhaps his point of view is that the great lines in politics may be changing. The orthodoxy, the orthodox ideas may be changing. The support by the people of the old uh, left or right ideas perhaps is diminishing. If you have this long view of the of a change in the waves of ideas, perhaps it is rational for Millet to say this. Well, if this world is changing, if ideas are changing, perhaps my position should be try to navigate this current, whatever my possible allies can be, and whatever the great differences I may have with them. But perhaps, I mean, I should follow Trump. Trump is a protectionist. I mean, this idea is as far as Millei's idea as anything anybody could imagine. I mean, he has never in foreign trade has never backed any other position but complete, full, unilateral free trade. And now you see him hand in hand with Donald Trump, who is a protectionist and boasts of being a protectionist. So, how come we can understand this movement? I think this is the long answer, as I told you, that these people, all these people, even Meloni and Bolsonaro, strange, and believe that something is going on in the world of ideas. And if they are right and something is moving on, is going on in the world of ideas, perhaps the movement is not irrational, though it is very strange, I must admit it.
So, sticking on that point of the world of ideas, or the changing world of ideas. So, Millet, from what I can tell, pre-election, deeply pre-election. So, okay, let me tee it up this way. So, in his book that he co-authored, Libertad, 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 in the introduction, which I think Millet wrote himself, it wasn't the other co-author,
Yep.
was a reference to Michel Foucault that I was surprised by, where he mentioned that fundamentally, in terms of economic long-term policy, political long-term policy, the thing you have to do is first you change the people. That's the Michel Foucault line. And this idea essentially now of the culture war was kind of embedded in that. But now, post presidency, his approach to constantly referring to la bataille culturelle, the culture
Mm.
war, is just so dominant in his discourse, everything he does. Before I go on, could you why do you think Millet has such a strong interest agenda, if you want to call it that way, on the culture war and trying to adjust it in a particular direction?
I think that this is because he really believes that ideas matter. He believes in that. And I remember many years ago, I interviewed Hayek in Madrid. He was finishing his last book, The Fatal Conceit. And I mentioned to Hayek this phrase that John Maynard Keynes wrote at the end of the general theory. Keynes said that ideas in the end matter more than interests. And I remember that light illuminated Hayek's face, and he said, "Yes, yes, Maynard was right."
Mm,
Well, I think that Millet goes along with Hayek and Keynes in this, and he believes that ideas really matter. Now, one thing is to say that ideas matter. Another thing is to say that you can shape the world
mhm,
according to your ideas. That's a very different thing, and that puts us in the field of the social engineering, or as Adam Smith put it, the man of system, who
mhm,
thinks that he can play with the people like if they were chess pieces. No? I think that he believes in the battle of ideas, in the cultural war, if you say. But that puts us in an interesting problem. Is that Millet is not a man of ideas any longer. He
mhm,
sits in the pink house in Buenos Aires. And when you are in politics and you make compromises, then you have problems because people who were convinced and who share your ideas can now raise their hands and say, listen, what about the ideas that you had 2 years ago? What about dollarizing the economy? What about closing the central bank? What about? And this is a very it's a delicate point. We are going to see, by the way, the political result of that this year. In
mhm,
October, we're going to have the midterm elections in Argentina. The polls say that the people are keeping the support they, to Milei, but we don't know. In any case, you have problems. I mean, you are a politician, and then you say, yes, the battle of ideas, and you keep changing ideas, or you keep making mistakes. The last one, of course, is Milei's support of this crypto token, the
mhm.
the the Libra,
Libra. Mhm,
which I think is terrible, terrible. Even in the best possible scenario, that is that he made a mistake, and that there's nothing more than that. That is very serious.
mhm,
You and I, Rashid, you and I can speak about Bitcoin or Libra or whatever. But if we are presidents, heads of state, you know what we have to say about cryptocurrencies? Not a word.
Yeah.
Not a single word. Not a single word. So that is, I mean, the list of political costs that Millet, of course, will have to bear.
So again, sticking to this ideas point, if Millet really is so interested in ideas, then you have to take seriously when he starts discussing ideas, or when he shifts his, call it, set of ideas to different dimensions. So, for example, again, when you read your book, when you listen to Millet from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you see a lot more influence of ideas. For example, your ideas of liberalismo. You have Alberto Beningas Lynch. You have Jorge de Soto. You see those kind of people really kind of flowing through the thoughts of Millet. But now, post presidency, um, even even explicitly, for example, you have him quoting, citing, sharing stages with, for example, like Agustin Laje, who calls himself somehow libertarian, but I don't think in a very sophisticated way you can think of him as libertarian thought. And his books, Millet always, for example, pushed him on Twitter. His books, for example, Millet gives endorsements on the book jacket. For example, the book La Bataille Culturelle by Lache Millet. It was the four people that endorsed the book printed on the is Milei, Bolsonaro's son, Ben Shapiro. That's an interesting combination in itself. But these kind of ideas, and when you read people like Lache, there is very little strong libertarian philosophy in it. But it feels like Millet is just pushing that substantially more than Jorge de Soto, for example, these days.
Mm. That is because you're absolutely right. I think that is because uh, Laje is influential among the right wingers in Argentina in a way that my good friends Jesus Huerta de Soto or Alberto Venegas Lynch are not. I mean, they
Mhm,
are influential in the world in the of the intellect of ideas, university, whatever. But when you speak of fighting the battle of ideas in Argentina, I think Laje is much more influential. Again, you have a problem. You have a problem. You people will raise their hands and say, "Listen,
mhm,
what are you doing with people
mhm,
who are not libertarians?" By the way, in the libertarian, I would say, family,
mhm,
not everyone agrees with Millet.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
in my book, I have to tell you a story about. I you know the story of this book. I mean, friends of Millet, they haven't liked it
mhm,
because I don't speak very well of him. But the
mhm,
enemies of Millet don't like it either because they think that I don't criticize him enough.
mhm,
And among the liberals, there are discussions about Millet, yeah? And
mhm,
I mention in my book, uh, to give you just one name, an economist and journalist named Roberto Kachanowski.
mhm,
He's a very well-known figure in economics in Argentina and a very old liberal. He criticizes the Millei's ideas and politics as well. So this is not a block of uniform thought. But in any case, in what you said about Laje, you're right.
mhm. Okay. So there is, if you were thinking about underlying let's call it ideas discourse in Argentina now in Milei, do you think, from your perspective, on average, or let's say on net, the discourse on liberalism has shifted in a good way in Argentina now that Milei is president?
You know something? This is the only thing that matters for me. I
Mhm,
don't care. I don't care who is the president of Argentina. I don't care about politics. The main thing is that we have there exists a shift in the ideas of the Argentinians towards a more liberal standpoint. And that, of course, I think, I hope, perhaps it's just a wishful thinking, but I think it that is a real phenomenon. Perhaps it's wishful thinking because just imagine if Millet fails.
mhm, mhm,
Just imagine. He can. I mean, things can go wrong. In Argentina, they have been going wrong for a century, so they can keep on going wrong. If things go wrong, people would say it's not only Millet's fault, it's liberalism's fault.
mhm,
So it's a very serious point that you've touched. I think it's the point. The point is not Millet. The point is the liberal ideas. Let me tell you why I think that the shift has been uh, uh, is a reality. Millet has taken some measures, some liberal measures, with very good results. For instance, he has freed the housing market, the rent market. Argentina has, as many other countries, yeah, a long tradition of rent controls with the usual consequences. There are no rooms for rent, no flats, no houses for rent. There's all these kind of negative consequences. And he freed the market, just like the Germans did after the Second World War, overnight.
Mm.
The overnight, he said, this market is free. And anyone can make any kind of contract with any condition, whatever you wish. And it worked. And people saw it worked. I think that is a very, very positive measure. And really thinking of the long term prospects of the ideas of liberty, this is the thing. I mean, that people can see that liberty works, that it is good for them, not for the great companies or the banks or whatever, for them, for the ordinary people. So that is one, you can say, that's the last straw you are. But I don't know. Imagine other thing. Imagine that inflation could be controlled.
Mhm.
That would be an extraordinary sign. It's very difficult, and that puts us in another technical, difficult question of the exchange rate and the use of the of overvalued peso to control inflation or whatever. But if inflation comes into control, so one thing, microeconomic freedoms with good results, inflation control, and extremely important, growth.
Mhm.
If Argentina started with these three blessings, then you could solve even the public finance problem,
Mhm.
even the debt problem. But you have these three things: micro reforms in the liberal sense, control of inflation, and economic growth. Uh, you're not having the three in a full sense, but I think we are moving in the right direction. I think.
So my final question, before I ask that, again, I recommend people to read Carlos's book. It's very, very important to read. Final question. There is some discussion in Argentina in the politics, in society, in the journalist circles in Argentina right now, that given Milei's very, very hard focus, or at least intellectual focus on the culture war in Argentina, but also globally, and coming off the heels of his, call it controversial, to put it mildly, controversial speech in Davos last month, it had a really strong social backlash in Argentina. There are many people now saying, but isn't the state of Argentina in terms of social libertarianism, social liberal policy, liberal social policy, that is actually what you do want to have. You do want to have these people with their, different sexualities, different female things, all these different concepts that Argentina already has, at least in Buenos Aires, that already have there. That there is this risk of Milei trying to push so much into the, call it, counter direction of the what he calls the virus of woke, or the gender ideology, that there is a risk of even trying to unsettle the liberalism of Argentina that come to a point after years and years and decades of social struggle and so on. And that then would kind of make his economic policy at risk, because, kind of as I said, if people go backlash against Milei, particularly, ironically, this is unexpected, ironically, for the social things that he says, it could unseat the economic progress that his government could have made, or probably definitely is making. Um, how risky do you think this gambit is of Millet to be pushing so hard It's kind of like what the philosopher Rene Girard he all says: "Be careful what enemies you choose, because you will become them." And how risky do you think this gambit of Millet, that his social policies, our social ideas in the world of ideas that we talk about many times, can actually unseat his economic progress in government?
Rashid, my friend, I think you have to ask me questions that I'm able to answer. Again, the short answer is I don't know. But yes, we have to admit the risk is there. Of course, it is risky, and as I told you, things can go wrong. Uh, Allow me to end this very nice discussion with a view of the past. Uh, we old people tend to look at the past, not like you insolent youngsters, but Argentina has a recent liberal, prosperous past.
Mhm,
Uh, Not many countries have that. I mean, of course, the Egyptians were rich 4,000 years ago, no? But they have forgotten that.
mhm,
Or Italians or Greeks, or of course the Spaniards.
mhm,
But Argentina was a very rich and prosperous country about a century ago. That is when my grandparents were born. And I spoke with them,
mhm,
and the images of the rich past are present. You can you can you can walk in Argentinian cities, particularly Buenos Aires, and people are amazed by what they see. I mean they believe that there's something wrong with the extraordinary beauties of the buildings that you have, and you go to the Teatro Colón,
mhm,
one of
mhm,
the first opera theaters in the world. I mean, that is where Enrico Caruso wanted to go to sing. There,
mhm.
there. And Arturo Toscanini and the great artists. And you can see that. And of course, that is a contrast with what happened since the time of my grandparents to our times, which is a continual decline, the decline and fall decade after decade and generation after generation. And if you look at the ideas that Millet was pushing when he presented in the election and he won, he continually was repeating this idea of the past. And I think that is a very good point to 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 try to make the Argentinians believe that if they were able to build those buildings, that wonderful country who attracted millions of immigrants of all around the world, who had one of the greatest income per capita in the world, if they were able to do that not very long ago, just a century, perhaps they can do it again.
Thank you, Carlos. This has been a very insightful conversation. And thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks to you.